Throughout the course of your life, you are bound to have experienced times where you have felt helpless and perhaps useless. However, you should take solace in knowing that no matter how useless you have felt, you are still not as useless, so to speak, as one particular animal, the koala. This may sound like a pretty harsh insult, but it's kind of true, because they are truly helpless. So much so that they have been labeled by many to be the most useless mammal around. And what's fascinating is that nearly all of their lackluster traits and characteristics stem from only one aspect of their lives: their diet. The vast majority of a koala's diet consists of leaves from a eucalyptus tree, which has resulted in them having a fairly restricted range, with these little marsupials only being found in eastern Australia. However, once upon a time, they were much more widespread, with 33 to 5 million years ago being their heyday. During those times, koalas had more generalized diets, and were joined by many very similar creatures like the Perry koala, which along with other koala-like marsupials formed the family known as Phascolarctidae. This diversity and more varied diet was possible as during those times rainforests were extremely abundant throughout Australia. But then, towards the end of the Miocene epoch, the continent began to experience drier and colder conditions, as polar ice sheets in Antarctica grew. This fairly sudden change resulted in the lush rainforests drying out and being replaced by open eucalyptus woodlands. Thus, in order to adapt, koalas shifted their diets, taking advantage of the new abundant flora. And between then and now, they had become extremely accustomed to their newfound diet, unaware that this adaptation would eventually haunt them, as eucalyptus leaves in many ways are a horrible source of food. For starters, these leaves have almost no nutritional value, resulting in koalas having to eat large amounts each day, despite weighing no more than 30 pounds or 13.6 kilos. Adults will typically consume over a pound of leaves, which constitutes more than 3.6% of their total body weight, requiring them to spend 4 hours a day foraging for food. This may not sound like a huge problem, but it is for koalas, as they sleep up to 20 hours a day. This extreme amount of sleep is again caused by the lack of calories in the eucalyptus leaves, which has forced them to use the low energy intensive nature of sleep to make up for their poor caloric intake. And on top of this causing a loss of time, their diet has also hindered their intelligence, as on a near nutritionalist diet, a larger brain cannot be sustained. In fact, its brain is tiny for a mammal when compared to its body size, being just 0.2% of its total weight, making it 60% lighter than you would expect in the average mammal of the same size. And its brain isn't only small, with studies also finding it to be smooth. This smoothness further detracts from its cognitive abilities, as mammalian brains are typically folded or wrinkled in order to increase the surface to volume ratio. And to add even more problems, the brain is fairly primitive in structure as well, ultimately rendering it unable to perform complex tasks and behaviors. A striking example of this is that koalas can no longer tell if something is food if you lay it flat. Meaning that if you put a koala in a room full of eucalyptus leaves, but the leaves are laying flat on the floor, it will believe it's in an empty room and subsequently starve to death. At this point, it shouldn't surprise you to know that even if a koala knows the room is full of food, it could still actually die of starvation, thanks to eucalyptus leaves being highly abrasive and toxic. This causes its teeth to erode and decay over time, forcing koalas to constantly grow their teeth throughout their lives. However, eventually they reach a certain age where their teeth can no longer regrow and the decaying becomes permanent, leading to a surprisingly fast death by starvation. This erosion is such a severe issue for koalas that it accounts for the majority of koala deaths. So much so, in fact, that some consider it to be the natural mode of mortality for these mammals. Koala populations show that teeth usually reach the point of no return between the ages of 10 and 12, which is reflected in their lifespans in the wild. Meanwhile, in captivity, koalas can live for a good 22 years, thanks to protective agents that can slow erosion or through food substitutions. Death by no teeth is a dilemma that impacts virtually every koala, and yet is very abstract to us humans. But another universal problem for koalas is one that humans are a bit more familiar with, and that is chlamydia. This is a sexually transmitted infection caused by the bacterium Chlamydia trachomatis. It infects millions of people each year, and is also surprisingly widespread in koalas, who are thought to have first picked it up through the feces of infected sheep and cattle. Today, it's possible that up to 90% of all koalas have this serious bacteria, which can cause eye inflammation, UTIs, and reproductive tract infections, leading to the question of why so many have it. A partial answer is that, like humans, they mate, but they also apparently use much less protection, leading to more infections. In reality, the bigger part of the picture is that many babies are infected shortly after birth. And of course, like nearly all of its other troubles, the reason behind this is obviously diet. Because eucalyptus is toxic, koalas have had to gain a unique trait to help them digest it, known as pap. This is a runny form of a koala mother's droppings and contains beneficial microbes that allow the babies to transition from a diet of milk to eucalyptus leaves. This is great and all, but of course leaves them very vulnerable to catching chlamydia, thus causing numerous infections in populations. By now, you may be exhausted from hearing about all the woes of koalas, but of course there is more to talk about. And yes, it again ties back to their main food source, as eucalyptus not only sustains koalas, but also actively tries to kill them. This is because eucalyptus gets around thanks to fire, as fire and smoke causes massive seed drops, and in some species of this tree is actually required for germination to even take place. As a result, the eucalyptus has literally added a burning stage to its life cycle, a massive problem for any animal that relies on it. And this issue is exacerbated through two of this tree's adaptations: flammable leaves and flammable gas. The leaves of the eucalyptus tree are known to release highly flammable oil throughout the tree's life, making them prone to fires. And once on fire, things go from bad to worse. As to aid in their burning process, the eucalyptus tree will also release gas when experiencing high temperatures that mixes with the air, resulting in giant fireballs. This leads to many koalas being burned to death during wildfires. And to answer your question on how bursting into flames is good for these trees, the answer is that by rapidly catching fire until there is no tinder left, the plant is able to retain most of its trunk when the fire ceases. The trunk can then regrow new limbs, unlike other types of trees which have to resprout from the roots. This is actually good news for surviving koalas, as it means less time that there is no food sources around. And despite eucalyptus causing many disadvantages for koalas, there are other redeeming qualities as well. For starters, the leaves do have a lot of water, meaning koalas essentially do not have to drink, being able to survive by eating leaves alone. Also, since eucalyptus leaves are highly toxic, koalas are virtually the only animals that eat them as a main food source. Therefore, they have nearly no competition. And finally, its smaller brain that was perhaps caused by a low-energy diet has resulted in them possessing a large amount of fluid in their skulls, which has aided them in their tree lifestyle, as when they fall, they are more protected from head injuries thanks to this adaptation. Though, let's face it, even with these saving graces, the odds are not in the koala's favor. So, it's a lucky thing that they can be awfully cute. And that about wraps up this episode. But if you want to hear about another animal with some crazy adaptations, then check out the video I just made on flying snakes. And yes, these actually exist, unfortunately. And like always, thanks for watching, and until next time on Living Zoo.